Hi there, my name is Gerald Dick. I am one of the 3 Adobe specialists here on campus at the University of Arizona. Today, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to be walking you guys through Adobe Illustrator, and in particular, how to create infographics with engaging data visualizations. What we're going to be doing today is really taking a look at Adobe Illustrator's graph creation and how we can go ahead and edit those once we've actually created the graph itself. This right here, if you guys already have it open, is the resource page we've created for this. And this is created in Adobe Express for those of you guys that are interested in creating some of these things. If you scroll down, you guys will go ahead and see some of what we will be doing today. And I have it all broken down for you guys to follow along. Or if you guys want to try this later on, you're welcome to do so. You can see here, we have it broken down into a series of steps. Each one of these is outlined similar to this right here, where we have highlighted all of the things we're going to be using and in the order which you guys should complete those operations. So that way you guys can do this on your own, or if later on you forget and would like to work on it some more or try something new, you can see how to do each of the actions that we create. So again, like I said, today we will be working in Adobe Illustrator, which for those of you guys have never used it before is a vector program. Let me go ahead and I'm going to just jump right to it and open up Illustrator here really quickly. So what we'll do is let me clear my artboard here really fast so that way you guys can follow along. When you guys go ahead and open Illustrator, it's going to prompt you to either work on an existing project, will be under your saved options. But most of you guys, if you're not new to Illustrator or haven't used it that much, aren't really going to have much there. So if, depending, you guys are going to be working on something that is going to be on a phone, for example, or print or film, you can see up here are a bunch of presets. So if I go ahead and click on mobile, you'll see they have preset sizes for my artboard based on the size of the phone display. And you'll notice here it is in pixels. Today, we are actually going to be creating something that would be more likely for a print product, but it's going to be a custom size. And if you're interested, you can create custom sizes over here on the right-hand side by simply changing a bunch of this information, which we're going to do right now. The first thing I encourage you guys to do is title your project. I don't know how many of mine start with untitled and then go into triple digits. It saves you a ton of time and you don't have to remake anything, which is kind of a shocker because I spend a lot of time making things over. So we're going to go ahead and title this Cola Wars Infographic. There we go. And because I don't think in pixels or picas or points, etc., I'm going to go ahead and change my sizing to inches here. So all my measurements will be done in inches as far as my artboard. And for width, we're going to plug in 8.5 inches. And then we're going to go ahead in our height and we are going to plug in 22. So this is basically the equivalent of 2 sheets of paper stacked on top of one another. So bleed, we're not going to need that today, but if you were actually sending this out to a printer, they would likely ask you to add a bleed to it, which you can add right here by simply clicking these arrows or clicking and dragging and plugging in whatever number you want. And because they are constrained proportions, it has this chain link. If I wanted to make it so they're different, I could unlink them and then increase them individually. But for what we're doing today, I do want to go ahead and I'm going to set these to 0 because we are not going to use a bleed. Down here, we are going to change these right here, in particular color mode. We're going to leave an 8 RGB, which is meant for monitors and displays, because like I said, I'm not going to be printing this. If I did want to print it, I would change my color format to CMYK, which is cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And that is the profile for printer. Although lots of the new printers have extended color palettes, so they have up to 8 colors in their print heads. So depending, but like I said, we still use a CMYK format. As far as raster files, so here's the difference, raster versus vector. Raster means it is pixel-based, and we are going to be using some pixel-based images in here, so we're going to be using some JPEGs. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to up my raster effects to 300 ppi, which is 300 pixels per inch, which is a larger, it's a print quality sort of setting as far as raster effects. Granted, they can get much higher, but for now, this is as high as it lets us go. And that's all we're going to change for this part. So we're going to go ahead and click create now, and that is going to open our artboard. Now, when you open yours, your artboard is going to look like this. And this is because it's in Adobe Illustrator Classic workspace, which right here under workspace, you can see there's a variety of them. Before we jump into it, though, you're going to see a couple things. You're going to see here on our left is our mouse tools. So these are tools that we use using our mouse. And like I said, we're actually going to open it up so we have some more. And then on this side, you're going to see a couple different things. We're going to have properties, and properties are used to explain an object, like what it has as far as, here, let's actually just go ahead and create a square. As far as properties is what it has as attributes. So for example, here on this square, I have a fill of white, a stroke of black at 0.013 inches, and I have 100% opacity. Now, I can change those things, and I'm going to show you guys how to do that later on. But just so you understand that properties basically shows us what attributes a particular item has. We also have our layers in here, which we're going to be opening separately here once we change our workspace. And then the last thing is libraries, which is one of the big pushes from Adobe. When you create something, we can take an object and save it to our library here in Adobe Illustrator. And then what I can do is go ahead and start working in, for example, another Adobe product like Photoshop or InDesign. And I can open my library there, and that same product or object that I've created is available in that other application, and I can simply import it into my new project in a different program. And so this is sort of their crossing all the programs, so that way they can be used in tandem, which is actually the way to use a lot of the Adobe products the best. Is there's specialties for each. Doesn't mean they can't use them. For example, we're going to be using a vector-based program, but we're going to use raster images in it. So you can use them across all of the different platforms, and it kind of comes down to preference. And the reality is the preference you have is the best option. We're not here to push one or the other. We're just here to highlight the attributes and the purpose of each one of the applications, and then how you choose to use them is really open to you. And that's sort of the artistic mindset, is how do you take something and then use it in a new fashion? And that's sort of what we're going for. So this is a selection tool. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this real quick, and then we're going to get started here. I'm going to go up to Window, and the first thing I'm going to do is change my workspace to Essentials Classic. Now, you'll see my tools, all of a sudden now I have multiple rows of tools. So I have all of my tool options. And like I said, not to be overwhelmed, but we're only going to be using a handful of these. Over on our side, we still have our properties menu, our libraries menu, and we do have a new menu up here at the top, which is a tool and object specific menu bar that will change depending on what tool and what object I have selected on my artboard. Until we add some things, this is really not going to change a whole lot. But like I said, as we go along, I will point out sometimes in this demo when we actually go ahead and see those changes occur, and then see its intuitive nature and how it helps us work faster, so it improves our workflow. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and start by setting up our layers. We're going to create two different layers for this project, and one of them is going to be our background, and that's going to be the first one. So to open our layers, we're going to go up to Window, and here's where all our palettes are going to be. And I'm going to go ahead and open my palette for layers, and they are alphabetical. I just forgot how to spell all of a sudden. So once it pops up, you're going to see it over here on the side, and then you have this menu bar also that I forgot to mention here, but these are like quick palettes. So they're the same things that are up here under Window, but depending, these are the most used ones you're going to see. And you can pin these palettes to this board if you prefer to do it that way as well. Once we have layers open though, we're going to go ahead and double click on the word, and we're going to change it to background. And then go ahead, and I can either click off or hit enter, and it'll just set it there. So our new background now has a blue highlight. So this is the marker for our blue background. So when I create a shape, for example, I'm going to go ahead and use the pen tool here. And we're going to just really quickly, while I show this, we're also going to discuss vector versus raster. So you'll notice when I set an anchor point right here, it's a little blue dot. And you see this line that follows me. This is going to be our next line segment. So when you have a raster image, for example, Photoshop, which is like a photograph is pixel based, I can only increase the size of it to a certain point before what we call pixelation occurs. So we actually can't add data to an original photograph. So it only is going to have the content that it was taken with under those circumstances. So depending on the camera you have, the better the quality of the photo, means the more pixels per inch. But we still can only go so large before we lose that resolution quality. Now, vector, for example, is working in these anchor points and paths is what we're really working with. So, for example, I can go ahead and click one more time, and all of a sudden, this is now a line segment. And what's actually happening is Illustrator works on vector, which means all of the things we create are created from mathematical equations. So for every line we make, it creates an equation from that point to the next. which allows us to scale our objects infinitely larger or smaller, depending on what you're doing. And what it does is that equation just extrapolates. So that way, when we blow it up, for example, I could take this 8.5 by 22 inch illustration we're going to create, and I could blow it up to the size of the front of the library, for example. And what would actually happen is, because it's in vector, it will actually go ahead and retain all quality, which means it'll look exactly as crisp as it does full scale on the front of the library as it does on my screen right now. We don't lose any resolution, and that's because of the vector format. Now, if I have a raster image included, that raster image, unfortunately, will pixelate, but the vector portions of it will not. Now, while we're on the pen tool, just so I can explain it, because we're not really going to cover a lot of the pen tool today, and I did in our resource page at the very bottom under additional resources, add 2 other workshops that do work in Adobe Illustrator. Some of them have more of the tools, for example, the pen tool in those to create custom graphics. And the other one is also another infographic creation using graphs and also editing. But if you want to learn more about the pen tool and creating graphics from custom, you can go ahead and look at that first resource page, and it's under simple logos, and you'll be actually recreating the Major League Baseball logo from scratch. You're just going to be tracing it out using the pen tool, for example. So if I wanted to create a curve, though, while I'm using these things, the pen tool, I can click and hold and drag, and that will create a curve. And now what it's looking for is this little tail on my mouse here that's following me everywhere won't go away until I close the shape. And you'll notice when I hover over it, I get a little circle, and that means the shape would now be closed. So if I click again, no more tail. But I also now have a shape. And this is the easiest way to think about working in Adobe Illustrator is when you create something, it's like, imagine taking pieces of paper and cutting those shapes out and then just laying them on top of one another over and over and over again. And that's kind of what we're doing in Adobe Illustrator. It's not like Photoshop where I can go in and what we call destructively edit, means manipulate and distort the image on that single layer. Every time we create something new in Illustrator, we get a brand new layer. And like I said, we can order those layers, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But every time you do that, just think about that while we're working, is you're creating a layer on top of another layer, and they just keep building up. So, okay. Now, if, for example, I want to delete something, I can just use this black selection tool. So this is the regular selection tool, and it'll select an object as a whole. And right here is the white selection arrow, which is the direct select. So if I click on this, I can click a very particular anchor point and stretch just those points or bend any of these lines. And that's using direct selection. Whereas if I use the black selection arrow, I can just click and it drags entire object. So the entire object is selected at once. To delete it, I can just make sure it's selected with the regular selection arrow and go ahead and hit delete, and that will make it disappear. So now that we've created our background, let's go ahead and we're going to drop in our first portion of this workshop, and that is going to be creating our background. And to do so, we are going to go ahead and use those assets that are on the resource page, and I can go to File, Place, and I'm going to go ahead and search for those. And for me, it's going to be a little bit of a chore because I have to go through all my files. If I were you, I would just save yours to the desktop. But like I said, everybody's got their own method in which they work. So go ahead and do what works best for you. So I'm going to go to this here, and you're going to have 2 folders. You're only going to have 2, which is going to be project elements and Excel files. And we're going to go into project elements, and we are going to go ahead and select this condensation background.jpg. We're going to go ahead and click place. And now what it's doing is it's waiting for us to go ahead and click somewhere on our page to place this image. And it'll always place from the upper left-hand corner down into the right. Now, this brings up shortcuts or hotkeys. You can also use, for example, to zoom in and out the magnifying glass, I can click and drag to the right to zoom in, drag to the left to zoom out. You can also use Command or Control plus or minus on your keyboard to zoom in and out, just so you can manage to see things a little bit better. So, for example, here, I'm going to need to see all of this in order to actually shrink this down to size. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to use the black selection arrow. If you use a hotkey, that's the letter V, and that'll select that tool. And I'm going to click and hold and drag this into place so it's in the upper corner. Now, when you are scaling or increasing or decreasing an object in size, we can grab from a corner, and if I don't do anything, I can completely distort this in very strange ways. But if I wanted to retain the exact same appearance it did before, I just hold down my shift key and that will allow me to scale it into place. Now, the shift key, you don't need to worry about holding it down. It doesn't actually do anything. It's just like an alternative key. So it allows you to perform alternative actions using other keys, or your mouse for that example. Now, let's go ahead and zoom in. And you can see it looks exactly the same. It's just a lot smaller, which is exactly what we were hoping for. Now, this does fit perfectly. And if for some reason it doesn't on yours, or you change your artboard, because this isn't type or a very specific or important image or logo, I could distort this a little bit if I felt like, but if I get to the point where I'm distorting it way too much and it looks too strange, we'd have to use a clipping mask, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later on. I'm going to talk about Pathfinder, and I'll also mention clipping mask as well. So once we've done that, we can go ahead and click off of it. So that's set. Now we can go ahead and we are going to go and build our first shape. And to do that, we're going to go over here to our toolbar. We're going to go down to the rectangle tool, and it could be under another one of these shape tools. And that's okay, because if you look at any of these tools that have a little triangle, this just means they have a drawer, which means they have similar tools inside of them. So if you don't see what you're looking for right away, you might have to find something that is similar to it and then click and look in that drawer and see if it's there. We're going to use a rectangle tool. You can also click M on your keyboard. And with a rectangle tool, I can click and drag to create one if I don't care what it looks like or the size, and it's just aesthetic for what I'm doing. And you'll see in that little gray box to the bottom right, you can actually see what the size, the width and height of this object is. And I can go through there like that. Again, it's not the most reliable way. What I would prefer to do is just go ahead and click once and it'll open up a dialog box and I can plug in the exact dimensions. So for this, we're going to go ahead and make it 8.5 wide. And then we're going to go ahead and change our height to 11 inches. So it's 1/2 the size of this overall image. And we're going to go ahead and click OK. Now, if we go ahead and click on the selection tool, so the letter V, you'll notice if I look at my properties menu, I have a white fill, black stroke, 100% opacity. I don't want a stroke. So I have two different ways of getting rid of it. I can either click on the color right here, and it'll open up the palette with the swatches. And right here is none. And I can click that and it will remove the stroke. So now I only have a white fill. I could also do that over here on my toolbar. And you can choose which object you're working with, whether it's the fill or the stroke, by bringing it to the front. So keep that in mind as we're working here. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to use the selection tool. I'm going to drag this into place here at the bottom. And then we're actually going to go ahead and open up our swatches. So we could either do it through here, or we can go to Window and open Swatches. And these are preset RGB colors. So again, we can make custom colors. And if I wanted to do that, I could simply go over here to my toolbar and double click. And I could go in here and pick anything I want. Or if I have a hex code, for example, if I'm making something here for the U of A and I need to use their red and blue, they provide those hex codes under brand.arizona. And you can go in and plug that hex code in and it'll give you the exact color of the U of A red and blue. But for now, we're just going to go ahead and select red. So I'm going to make sure the fill is in front and I'm going to click, and that will fill that object completely with red. Now, the next step is we are going to go ahead and we are going to apply a blend mode to this, which means we're going to make it so it's somewhat transparent. We're going to make sure that anything that's a darker color is allowed to show through this block of red that we've created. And to do that, we're going to go to Window and open Transparency. Now, under the transparency options, we have opacity, and we also have right here where it says normal. If I hover over it, it will tell you these are my blend modes. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is click on that, and I'm going to go and scroll down, and we are going to select multiply. And what that does is it allows the darker colors to show through that red square. So that way we can see the objects underneath. And we want to have that overtone over the top of it. Okay, so now that it has a blend mode, the next thing is we want to add a swoop to the top. And to do that, we're going to go ahead and select our pen tool. And again, you may have to click and hold and open the drawer, or select the pen tool, or click P on your keyboard. And we're going to hover here towards the middle, and you're going to notice all of a sudden, most of your computers will automatically do this, or Illustrator. You see that hot pink line that appears down here to the middle. These are called smart guides, and it's just helping us align things. And what we're going to do is we're just going to follow that smart guide up to here. And you're going to notice my pen tool goes from a little asterisk next to it to a plus symbol. So if we click once, it's going to add an anchor point. Now, we can't really do much with this anchor point other than move it at this point, and it'll just keep straight lines. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to give it curvature by going back to our pen tool, clicking and holding, and selecting the anchor point tool. Or if you want, you can use Shift C. And what this does is if I now click on this and hold and pull, it will take those straight lines and create curves. It also works in reverse. If I have curves and I want them to be straight, I can take this same tool and just click on it once, and it'll snap back to being perfectly straight lines. But for now, we're going to go ahead and click and drag so we have a little swoop, something like this. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and click on the selection tool. And this pretty much wraps up what we have for our background layer. So if your layers aren't open, you can go over here to this little menu and you'll see right here, these two overlapping diamonds are the layers. And you can hover over any of these and they'll tell you what they are. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. And right next to this eye, which turns things on and off, as far as being able to view them, is an empty box. And if we click on that, it's going to put a lock in there, which means I can now no longer work on this layer until I unlock that object. So what we can do next is we're going to click on this little plus to create a new layer. We're going to double click on the name, and we're going to go ahead and title this artwork. And this is going to be the layer that we're going to create all of the images and graphs on. And the reason we created two layers is whenever we're clicking and dragging over things, I don't want to have to worry about moving my background or distorting it in any way. So we're going to make sure that we have it locked and we're only going to work in this layer. And we're going to start by placing a preset vector that I've created already for you. So we're going to go to File, we can go to Place, and we're going to select this Cola Wars header.ai. So I'm going to go ahead and click Place, and I'm going to drop it in. And I'm going to put it up here towards the top. And you're going to notice right here, Cola has an orange C on the front of it instead of red. And I'm going to show you guys, because this is an AI file, so this is native to Adobe Illustrator, and you see these two lines that cross through it, generally means this file is linked to another document. So a lot of the Adobe products now have linked files. So when I create something, so if I created this product and this Coca-Cola War or Cola Wars, and then opened it and used it in, for example, InDesign, and then realized, oh man, I made a mistake. This is orange, it should be red. Rather than have to go in and open Illustrator, edit it, and then bring it back, I can simply click on it using the selection tool. And here's an example. If I click off, here is our object and tool specific menu. If I click on it, all of a sudden you see it changes. And up here in the top, I have edit original. So I can click on that and it's going to open in a new window that item. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take direct select. I'm going to select that C. I'm going to click on my eyedropper and I'm going to select that same red. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go and close it. And it's going to say, do you want to change or save your changes? And I'm going to say save. And then I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go back to my original document, click on my selection tool, and it may take a minute or two, but it will give us a prompt that this file has been changed. It's going to ask it, do we want to update? And if we say yes, it'll give us that new feature. It'll change it to red. And like I said, this may take a minute and it might pop up while we're working on something else. That being said, we're going to go ahead next and we're going to add some type underneath and we're going to say who's winning. To do that, we're going to open our type tool. So over here, our text tool. Oh, here you go. See, so here's our pop-up. It says some of these files are missing or modified in the links panel. Would you like to update them now? So I'm going to go ahead and click yes, and you'll see it automatically updates. So in any other program that I use this graphic, it will automatically update without me having to go in and make any edited changes or things like that. So if you're creating a newsletter or something like that, this is a great feature. You can make edits and it'll automatically update for you. You don't have to go through and do it yourself. Okay, so back to adding type. So I'm going to click on the type tool or click T on my keyboard. And for what we're going to do, you have two different ways of creating type. I can click once and basically it's like creating a run-on sentence. It won't ever text wrap unless I hit the return key to go down a line. And what we're going to do is we're going to put who's winning, although I think I spelled that wrong. Really small too, I can't tell. So who's winning? Now that I'm done and I just clicked one time and I typed, I'm going to click on the selection tool and I can either click here and hold the shift key and drag to make it bigger, or up here in my object and tool specific menu bar, you can see all of a sudden it's changed. I now have character, I have what I guess it would be italicized, bold, regular, etc., like what type of font it is. And then also how big or small, and I can change it either there or by clicking and dragging. Right here is our character, which is our fonts. So any font you have, you can go in and see in real time what it looks like. And for this, I think we used impact. So I'm just going to type in impact or IM and it'll pop up. Now I can scale this so it fits a little bit better underneath where I'm at. So put who's winning. And this is where we're going to save for our graph in just a minute. So now that it has who's winning, let me just go real quick and show you, just so you know, type tool. I can also create text boxes. And you can see it automatically fills with a sample text. Now, the thing is, unfortunately, unlike just clicking, if I click and drag with a text box, you'll notice all it does is make and readjust my type. So if I'm creating a pamphlet, a brochure, or anything with a lot of information as far as type, this is a great way to do it. And it saves you the trouble of having to manually go ahead and then jump down a line every time you want to make it fit. So keep that in mind. Like I said, for this, not really ideal, but for other projects, it's a great feature. So I'm going to go ahead and delete that. All right. So next thing, we're going to go ahead and we are going to start by creating our first graph. And we're going to create a pie graph. So if I go to my toolbar and I scroll down here, I can click and hold. So these are our graphs. Now, depending on what it is, it's usually a column graph in the little tab. But if you click and hold, here are all the other graphs that you can create. And depending on what you're doing and your needs, there's quite a few. What I'm going to go ahead and do is select the pie graph tool. And I'm going to go ahead and click and drag just so I can create a space that this is going to inhabit. Now, when I let go, you'll see it creates a placeholder graph. And this is our data entry port. So here is our entry field. So what we're actually going to do is if I open up those downloaded folders again, I'm going to go ahead and navigate. So let's go to documents. I have to do the same thing over and over again, which I apologize. Let's go ahead, workshops, Adobe Illustrator 2023. And then in here are your downloads, Excel files. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open SOTA preferences. So I'm going to double click and it's going to launch for me. Here, let me drag it over from my other menu real quick. So here is my data entry for that. And for this, unfortunately, we can't import solely straight from here, but we can go ahead and create all of our stuff in Excel. And then I can click and drag to select all of these. And I can either go to edit, copy, or I can use Command or Control C to copy. And you'll see here's those marching ants, meaning it's selected. I'm going to go back to Illustrator now. So let me move this off to the side. And in the data entry, I'm going to click one time so it's selected. And I'm going to go ahead and hit Command or Control V, which means paste. And you'll see it automatically plugs in all of those on their own lines. Now, one of the things we found is if we don't adjust our rows, here, let me go ahead and I'm going to apply these features by hitting the check mark. It creates a graph proportionally in size, which could also actually be a really cool feature depending on what you're trying to do. But for what we're doing, it doesn't really work. We want to have it in slices. So what I can do over here is go to transpose row and column. And if I click on that, obviously nothing happens because I have to click apply. So I'm going to go ahead and click that check mark. And here is our graph now. It now applies those features. So I'm going to go ahead and move this out of the way because we're not going to need it right now. The good thing about these graphs is they're continuously editable. So I can go ahead and if I decided, oh, I need to add a section, I can add a new one and it'll create a new slice. So this is a live graph, which we can constantly update in this state. We're going to create a second graph, which we're actually going to dismantle, which we'll talk about in a minute. But all right, so once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and we're going to click on our black selection arrow, the letter V. And when I do that, you're going to notice I can look here and it's going to say under my appearances under properties, it has a question mark. It's like, well, it doesn't have a fill that matches. And that's because we have 6 different colors. So it doesn't know what that truly is, but it does say we have a stroke on everything. And the reality is we don't actually want a stroke again. So we're going to go ahead and click on the stroke and we're going to select none to get rid of it. And what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and adjust the colors of it. To do that, we're going to go ahead and click on our direct selection tool. And I'm going to go ahead and click one time. And I'm going to open my swatches and I'm going to make sure fill is in front. And I'm going to start to change the color of these. So I'm going to plug these in really quickly based on what soda it was. So we have Coke, Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Dr. Pepper. Right here, I think we have is Sprite. And I think this was other, so Fanta, etc. So here's our different colors. And it's entirely up to you what you do and what you pick. Now I'm going to go back to my selection tool, and now I can adjust this. So I'm going to move it around. So it's about right there is where I want it. And what we're going to do next is we're going to go ahead and we're going to add the type for each one of these. So we're going to put the name and then the percentage. So to do that, we're going to go back to our type tool. We're going to click one time, and I'm going to put Coca-Cola. I'm going to press return to go down a line, and I'm going to put in 40% is my percentage as far as preference. Now I'm going to click on selection now. So you can see this is called the bounding box, and that bounding box tells us that this object is active and selected. Up here, again, here are all of my type related tools and also some alignment tools. So I'm going to click on align center so they're nice and neat. And I'm going to hold shift and drag, and we're going to put that right there. And now I can either copy and paste this type, and then we're just going to go ahead and edit it. And I can do that by doing edit, copy, edit, paste, or Command or Control C, Command or Control V. There is another way, which depending on how used to using hotkeys you are, we can click and hold, and then hold down the Alt or Option key and drag, and it'll create a copy for us. So I'm going to create a bunch of copies, and then we're going to go back and we're going to edit them real quick. So all I need to do, I can either click on the type tool, or I can go ahead and click once and then double click, and then I'm allowed to go in and actually edit that type. So we're going to put Pepsi, and I think Pepsi is at 24, it looks like. So we're going to put 24%. I'm going to go over here. This is Mountain Dew. We're going to abbreviate that since we don't have a lot of space. So Mountain Dew, I believe, is 10%. Yes. Okay. Next, Dr. Pepper. So Dr. Pepper is actually a little bit higher, and Dr. Pepper is at 12%. So here we have Sprite. So Sprite is at, I believe, 8%, and other, which our last section, should be 6%. Now, when I originally did this, this all added up, so hopefully this makes sense. Okay, so now we can go ahead. I'm just going to use selection tool and move a few things around so they fit a little bit nicer. What I can do now is I can click on, for example, this type. If I want it to match, so I'm going to use selection. I'm going to click on it. We're going to go to eyedropper or click I. Well, it's selected, and I'm going to go ahead and click on the corresponding piece of the pie. And that'll change the color. And I can simply continuously do this. So I'm going to use I and change them really quickly so they match. Nothing like color coding. One more way to make sure everybody's attention is focused and everybody doesn't misconstrue what it says. Okay, so now these all correlate. Now, if you wanted to add lines, for example, Command or Control plus to zoom in there, I'm going to go ahead and select the pen tool again, and you can see it's changed over here. So I'm going to go ahead and click and hold, click on it, or the P. And the reality is, when I'm using the pen tool, I'm going to create lines. So I don't actually want to fill. So I'm going to click on none. I'm going to bring the stroke to the front, and I'm going to select black. And now I can go ahead and click, and then click one more time, and that'll set a line. And I can go ahead and hit return, and that'll make it so I don't have to close that shape anymore. It'll just stop the line right there. So let's go ahead and add these to the rest really quickly. Now, this isn't completely necessary, so it's kind of up to you whether or not you do this, but just for the sake of showing you. Now, let's say, for example, I'm like, wow, those lines are really thin. I can barely see them. What we can do is let's go ahead and select them and actually make them a little bit thicker. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the first one using the selection tool. I'm going to hold down the shift key and click on the rest. And that allows me to select more than one object at one time. Now, for example, if I accidentally click on type and I'm like, ooh, I don't want that, I can still be holding the shift key down and click on it one more time, and it will deselect. Now I can go to window, I can open stroke. And right here, yours is going to look a little bit more like this. And this is just the weight, which is really what we're going to be working with. But there's a lot of other features. And just to show you how to get to them, you can click on these other three little lines, which if you open it, says show options. And it'll show you all of the other things you can do. So the caps, the corners of your lines, the stroke alignment, whether you want a dashed line, profile, so you can change how the line was weighted depending. But like I said, for now, we're really only going to be using this, and I'm going to go ahead and change it to 0.05. Just make them a little bit thicker so they stand out. and then I can click off of it. So that's basically how we complete a graph in Adobe Illustrator for a pie chart. And like I said, this is still an editable graph. Here is the editor for it. And for now, I'm going to go ahead and close it. But if I want to bring it back, I can go ahead and click on it and then click on my graph feature again. And it will go ahead and it should pop it back up. But for now, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to move on since we have limited time. We're going to go ahead and drop in the start of our next one. And we're going to highlight the Coca-Cola, since obviously they are killing it in the cola wars. We're going to go ahead and I'm going to move down. If I want to do this where I can move more freely around my artboard, you can go ahead and hold your space bar, and that opens the hand tool right here. And that allows you to click and drag, and it'll move your whole artboard so you can see better. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drop in the next thing, which is a logo. And it's going to be the Coca-Cola logo. And this time, rather than do it like we were before, I'm going to go ahead and show you another way. So I'm going to bring in, here are my features. I'm going to click on project elements. Here's the Coca-Cola logo. And if I don't want to use place, I can always just have these open and click and drag, and it'll drop it in for me. And then again, just like before, this is an editable document. I'm going to go ahead and hold Shift though to drag it down, to shrink it so it fits a little nicer. So here is our Coca-Cola header for the bottom. Now, the next step is we are going to go ahead and we are going to be creating a bar graph, or a column graph in this case. And we're actually going to be taking it apart, and then we're going to be using each of those columns to fill some vector Coke bottles that we're going to create. So we have a actual column graph made out of Coke bottles instead. So it's a little bit more interesting to look at. And like I said, this again is just the beginning of what you can do with it, but it is a great start. So let's go ahead. We're going to go ahead and select our graph type, which is going to be graph tool column, or you can click J on your keyboard. And we're going to go ahead, click and drag, and we're just going to create it really quickly here. It's just like before, creates a placeholder, and then here's our data entry. So we're going to go ahead and open our other data entry. And I'm going to go ahead and open my Excel files. And this time it's going to be Coca-Cola values for the past, here, let me drag it over, Coca-Cola values for the past 5 years. So we're going to double click and open that. I'm going to bring that on over. And here are all of those values as well. And just like before, we're going to copy them, edit, Command or Control C. We're going to come back over in the entry box, press Command or Control V to paste. And rather than do it like we did last time, we're going to just go right away and click on Transpose Row and Column, and we're going to click Apply. And that'll apply all of my different bars for this. So now that we're done, what we're going to do is this is going to be what we would call destructive. We're actually going to make this so this can no longer be edited. So for what we can do is go ahead and click on the selection tool. We're going to make sure it's selected, and we're going to go to Object. Let's click off, click on. Okay, I guess we have to close that out. Object, and then we're going to go ahead and click Object Ungroup. So Command or Control Shift G will ungroup your object. And when I do that, so if I go Object Ungroup, usually you get a prompt that's going to tell you that's a graph. And if I do that, it's going to damage my graph. So let's see, Object Ungroup. There we go. So the selection contains a graph. After the graph has been grouped, you will no longer be able to access its graph style, its data, or change its graph designs, which is fine because, like I said, we're going to be doing something a little different. So we're going to go ahead and click Yes. Now, once I've done that, if I click off of it and click back on, you'll notice my bars are actually separate from the axes, which is perfect because that's what we want to do. We're actually going to break this down more, but we're going to do that in just a moment. What we need to do is bring in our Coke bottles. And what I'm going to do is show you how to convert a JPEG or any other sort of file that's reasonable quality into a vector so that we can edit it. And to do that, we're going to go ahead, we'll place again. So we're going to go File, Place. This time we're going to select right here this Coke bottle. And it's Coke bottle silhouette.ai. This is actually a vector file, but I'm going to use it as a JPEG so I can show you how to turn it into a vector. So we're going to go ahead and click Place, and I'm going to drop it. Take my selection tool, move it into place. I'm going to scale it a little bit so it's a little bit smaller. And what I'm going to do is if I bring in a JPEG and I've got reasonable quality like this, I've got good contrast between darks and lights, I can go up here And in my tool and object specific menu bar, you can see right here is an object called image or button called image trace. And if I click on the drop down menu, I can select black and white logo. And I still have a linked file because it's still got the cross lines through it. But up here, if I click expand, this will complete the conversion from vector or from raster to vector. And if I hold down my command key, you can see here's all the anchors it created to duplicate that image. Now, we don't want the background. And this is all grouped, and I don't really want to, we can ungroup this as well. So we can go to object, ungroup again. Now I can click on this outer piece and press delete. And these are together. So I'm going to hold shift to make sure I have them both selected. I'm going to bring them over here, and I want to shrink this down because I want to be able to fit 5 across because I have 5 different bars. So let's go ahead, let's put one here. While they're both selected, we're going to use that same trick we did up here. We're going to hold down the option and alt or option or alt key, depending on your type of computer. We're also going to hold down the shift key. And just real quick, the shift key allows you to drag horizontally, diagonally, and vertically perfectly. So it allows us to make nice, clean transitions from one to the next. So we're going to go ahead and hold option and alt, and then the shift key, and that will allow us to drag perfectly across and create a duplicate. So let's say we're going to go about this far. I'm going to let go of my mouse, then I'm going to let go of my keys. Now, Illustrator has this cool feature called duplicate, and I can hold down Command or Control and then press the letter D key, and that will duplicate those shapes. So we have all 5. You'll notice we have some extra room. So what I'm going to do is click and drag over all of them with the selection tool. I'm going to hold my shift key, and I'm going to drag them just so they're a little bit bigger, so I have a little bit more room. So once we have that, we're going to let those be. Now we're going to click on our graph, and now we're going to start to edit it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of that stroke because we don't want a stroke. And then we're going to go ahead and we are going to put these down so they're about the same height as the bottle. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to ungroup these one more time. So we're going to go to Object, Ungroup. And so now what will happen is now they are separate from each other. So the group itself of all of them is no longer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make them so they're a little bit wider than the actual bottles. And I'll explain that in just a minute. So go ahead, do that. Oop, not what we wanted there, sorry. So let's go ahead and drag this one over. Now, we may have trouble. So if we run into an issue, for example, like this, where it's actually taller than the bottle, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go ahead and select all of our bottles again, because we're actually going to need to increase the size of this a little bit. So let's go ahead and make them roughly yay big. So now I can readjust where I put those really fast. And you're going to learn that not everything goes the way you planned the first time, especially when you're working on this stuff. So keep that in mind. All right. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and use the selection tool. I'm going to click on the first white bottle. I'm going to hold down my shift key and select the rest. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to make a copy of them because we're going to use what's called Pathfinder, and that's going to allow us to clip those colors to a shape. So what we're going to do is make sure they're selected, and then we're going to hold down Command or Control, and we're going to hit C to copy. And we're going to paste a copy, but we're going to paste a copy directly in front of these existing ones. And to do that, we can use Command or Control F. And you can also do that by going up to Object, Copy, and then you can actually go to Edit, Paste in front right here. You can also see they give you all the hotkeys right here for those things that you're going to use most often. This right here might be the most commonly used, Command Z, undo. Okay, so now we actually have a copy. So if I was to move this, you can see I still have one underneath. So here's an example, Command or Control Z, undo, so it's in the same spot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I have my selection tool active. I'm going to click on that first bottle. I'm going to hold down the Shift key. I'm going to click on the shape behind it. And you're going to notice all of a sudden I got a new section in my properties. And this is part of the intuitive nature of the Adobe products. Is right here is Pathfinder. It says you have 2 objects. You might want to be uniting them, subtracting them, intersecting, or excluding them. You can also get to this menu by going up to Window and selecting Pathfinder. And it'll look like this. And it does have a few other features in here as well as far as Pathfinders. But for what we're doing, we really only need to be using this Pathfinder feature here under shape modes called intersect. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. And all of a sudden, you can see my shape is still white, but I have, it doesn't go all the way to the top. So what we're going to go ahead and do, and it doesn't go outside. So let's open our color palette, and I'm going to go ahead and click on a color, and you can see it only fills my bottle up to here. So we're going to go ahead and do the same thing for the rest of these really quickly. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to intersect. I'm going to pick the next color. This one, this, intersect. Next. Intersect, next. And last one, intersect, and the last brown color I got. So here are now, instead of having a regular column graph, we now have a Coke bottle column graph, just to make it a little bit more interesting to look at, which I think is also important, is like when you're trying to show someone and get an idea or information across, make it interesting so they want to look at it. I don't know how many times I've been given in school, even in college, let me rephrase that, you know, a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy, and it's like you almost can't read it. So this is just a way to make it a little bit more interesting and definitely more readable. So what we're going to do next is just like we did up here, we're going to add our information. We could continue to use this, but I think it's just a lot easier to have it spelled out. It's easy, quick to recognize. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to use my type tool. I'm going to click over here, and right here you can see in value in billions, I have the years. So 2018 to 22, so 18 to 22. So let's do 2018. I'm going to go ahead and click on the selection tool. I'm going to go ahead and change my typeface, my font, for example. And let's go ahead and select, well, you guys may or may not have that feature. So let's see which font you might have. Let's just use Arial Black. And I'm going to go ahead and shrink this a little bit. And you're going to see how often we use this click and drag to duplicate feature. I'm going to go ahead, click, hold Alt or Option, and the Shift key, drag it over so it's right underneath. And I'm going to press Command D, Command D, Command D. And now I can just go back in and edit these. And I know they're all evenly spaced. For those of you guys that are sticklers for those kinds of things, because I know I am. So here we go. Here are all of the years. So now we're going to go ahead and we are going to select all of these, and I'm going to drag these down a little bit just to make a little bit more space. And then on top, we're going to go ahead and put that value. So what does that actual value look like? This alone tells us that obviously over the last 5 years, their value has only increased. The question is how much. So let's go ahead and click on our type tool. Same thing again. We're going to go ahead and put our first one is 33.01 billion, which is an insane number to imagine, but here we are. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to shrink it down. And rather than have it horizontal again, I'm going to make it vertical. To do that, I can hover over this edge, click and hold, and I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and that allows me to rotate in perfect 45-degree angles. And I can go ahead and then now put that right on top. So let's put that right there. And then just like we did on the bottom, I'm going to hold Alt or Option and the Shift key, and I'm going to complete my duplications, and then I can go in and just edit them as I need to. So 33.01, 34.3 is our next billion, which is insane. Okay, next is 37.27. Oops, that was a lot more money in that one. 37.27, then we have 38.66. And then our last one is 43 billion. But it's just for the sake of it. So let's add a 0 here as well, just to balance it out. Now, if for some reason, I'm going to go ahead and use the selection tool, I'm going to select all of these by holding the Shift key down. If they all don't align to the bottom, for example, right here, if you go up to the very top here, you're going to notice in that intuitive bar, you're going to see a feature called Align. And if I click on that, I can choose how I want these objects aligned. So in this case, I want them to be aligned with the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and it'll move everything into alignment. So there is that portion. And so let's add one more section to our type here. And for that last section, we're just going to go ahead and give it one more little title. And that little title will go ahead and be profits for the past 5 years. So we'll go ahead, click on our type, and we're going to put profits for the past 5 years. And then we'll go ahead and shrink that down. So here's the title to our new chart or graph. And then we can go ahead and just place that where we'd like. Now, the last step is going to be, I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this other stuff that we don't need. So I'm going to go ahead and click delete. And this pretty much sums up how we create a couple different types of graphs and how we can edit them in Adobe Illustrator. Now, Adobe Illustrator isn't your only option, obviously, for creating things like this, but it does give you much more control and power over what you can create and how creative you can get with it. And like I said, it may be sort of a learning curve to get started, but it does open up so many more doors. And these are just the beginning. If you want, there's added features such as drop shadows. We can add 3D rendering very quickly by using, here real quick, we'll do this roll. We'll make our pie graph here into a 3D object. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click on it once, and then we'll go up here to window, or no, we're gonna go to effect, 3D and materials, and we're gonna click on extrude and bevel. And when I do that, all of a sudden it turns it into a 3D object, and I can go here and just adjust the angles of those things. So I can make them look much more complicated and intricate by simply adding a few clicks of a button here in Adobe Illustrator, which is a huge perk. So, and like I said, there's much more than this, but this is just a starting point to get you interested into it. And then, like I said, hopefully down the road, we'll offer some other workshops where we can go in and get into some of the more intricate and complicated features that allow you to do some really, really incredible stuff. So, but for today, that is the feature that we wanted to go through and show you, is those graphs in Adobe Illustrator. The last thing I'm going to go ahead and show you is how to save. And you have a couple different ways of doing that. File, and the first thing that everyone wants to do is go File, Save, or Save As. And when I do that, you're going to see this pop up. It gives us the name that we put in at the very beginning. If you didn't name it, now's a great time. And then I'm going to go ahead and choose where I'd like to name it. And I can do that through here. And the last thing you're going to look at is format. And this is the part where most of you guys are going to be interested. So if I click on format, it shows me a couple different options. I have AI, which is this native file, EPS, AIT, which is a template one, which you're rarely going to use, PDF, SVGZ, and SVG. And pretty much any one of these that I save it under will allow me to open it back up in Adobe Illustrator. It'll retain all of my layers, and I can go ahead and continue to edit them. So that's a good thing to know when you're doing that, is any of these are editable. As long as it was created in Adobe Illustrator, you can open it back up and continue to edit. Now, once you go ahead and select one of those and hit save, you have to go through a few prompts. There's some other windows, and they're all different, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but they're pretty straightforward, and then you can make sure that that'll complete your save. Now, if, for example, I want to save this, any of those features in the Save As that we were just in, any of these formats are not readily available, except for example, PDF, to somebody that doesn't have a program that can open Vector. And you'd be surprised, there's quite a few people that can't. So if you wanted to share this with somebody so they could view it on their phone or on their computer or wherever without any interruption, we can go to File, Export, and we're going to go over Export As. Export for screens is a little more complicated, and it's more specific for people that are doing big projects with lots of output. So let's go to Export As. And now under Export As, it's going to look exactly the same, except you see the format automatically is a PNG, which is great. So if you save something as a PNG, anything that's transparent, so if it was white, is still transparent, which is a great feature. But if I click on that, you're going to see I have a whole other different set of exports. So under those exports, we have JPEG, which is probably one of the most universal and the smallest file sizes, which you can go ahead and use. And you still have some others as well. But like I said, depending on what you're looking for, that's where all of your save features are going to be, and your different formats. And then again, you'll hit export, and you can go ahead and go through those prompts, and that'll pretty much wrap up your project, and everything will be saved. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. I hope you guys have a great day, and hope to see you at the next workshop.